Well, Jim, with all these reviews before the listeners get poached or anything, let's move on. Let's get going with the show. But I understand you have a story and you want to tell it.
Well, I found something because, we talked about the big attic insulation project I went through. Had to move a lot of stuff in the vault. Well, I finally had to move a lot of stuff back into the vault, out of the office and clean up because I had a TV crew here again the other day. More on that in the coming weeks.
America's
but I found
Most
some
Wanted.
things. Well, no, I didn't make the list this week. I politicked for it, but I couldn't make it. But I found some things, and one of the things we've talked about lately on the program, ticket prices to events today versus what, they were back in the territory days. And we've also played on this program, Guess the Program, which we're going to do a little bit of here later on, I understand. But this is something that kind of relates without relating to both of them, tickets and wrestling events. I found tickets to a show that I didn't go to, but that Christine Jarrett had given me because she was telling us the story about it. And this is one of those things that could only happen in the territories and maybe even then only happen in Tennessee, in that territory during that period of time. We've talked about how that, in the days of the 50s, 60s, and especially early 70s, there were no pro sports in Nashville. It was the Grand Ole Opry and wrestling. And there was a heavy crossover between the country music stars and the wrestlers. A lot of them knew each other. Jerry Jarrett used to be next door neighbors to Bobby Bear and lived across Old Hickory Lake from Johnny Cash. And, people used to come to the shows, blah, blah, blah. And they'd go to the bars downtown, especially in the 50s and 60s. So anyway, we've also talked about Eddie Marlin. Remember, I went down to visit him when he was ill right before he passed away. Randy Hale set it up for me to come over that day, and we told that story about how Eddie had been around wrestling in Nashville since he was a teenager in the 40s. And he had wrestled and refereed and hauled the ring, but on a small-time basis. But then when Jerry Jarrett started booking and opened up his own towns, Louisville and Evansville, and he saw something in Eddie that he connected with the fans because he was just like them. And by that time, Eddie was past 40. But Eddie Marlin and Tommy Gilbert were the top babyface tag team in the territory in 1973. They were main event and sellouts in Memphis, whatever, because the people loved him. They identified with him.
And Tommy Gilbert looked like he was past 40.
And Tommy he looked like Burt Reynolds past 40. So he had that sex appeal going for him. But anyway, so the thing is, Eddie finally, and then Jerry had him transition into working for him full-time, promoting and running towns. But Eddie was an unlikely top babyface in that he had his big run where he was the star of the territory when he was like almost 45 years old. But we don't talk that much about his brother, Thomas Marlin. And Tommy Marlin was a referee, and you see him in a lot of the NWA World title matches. Tommy didn't work Memphis, but he would come down to referee the NWA title matches because Thomas was a bit of a babyface glory hound too, right? And he liked to put the suspenders and the bow tie on for the world title matches. But here's the thing. Thomas was where Eddie was tall and lanky and had the big belly and the buggy whip arms, just like the fans, right? That they loved him. Thomas was several inches shorter and squat and thick and had a big old round head and this big mane of silver hair. If you put him in a rhinestone cowboy suit, he would have looked like a country music star. He had that profile and that silver hair, right?
Rhinestone.
And Thomas had not really been involved in the wrestling business to that extent until later on, as Eddie started working more regularly for Jerry. Then referee Bobby Thomas arrived. They didn't want to tell people that the referee was actually Eddie Marlin, the top babyface's brother, so he worked as Bobby Thomas. But then eventually, obviously, they got to do the angle. So Bobby Thomas is revealed as Thomas Marlin when the heels jump him and beat him up. And now he would join Eddie every once in a while for tag team matches And especially when Johnny Eagles came in from England and looked just like Eddie Marlin, and they made him Eddie's cousin from London. Then they had the three Marlin brothers and six mans, or a three Marlin family, and it was just swell, right? But point of this story is Thomas was also, he was only a couple years younger than Eddie, so he's in the mid 70s, he's in his middle 40s. And you know, I think I saw Thomas wrestle. I wrestled him in 1982. The thing about Thomas is he was a stiff motherfucker. Every time he laid his hands on you, it would hurt. His punches were stiff. His broad arms would knock the breath out of you. And what are you going to say? You know, this fucking 50-something-year-old man, and he's a referee, but he's beating up all the boys, but he's fucking stouter than they are. Anyway, the reason I tell this story is because Thomas Marlin was not in wrestling full time. As I say, he would come up on Tuesday nights and referee in Louisville. He'd go to Memphis for the world title matches most of the time. And maybe he'd be in Lexington once a month or whatever, bigger shows, because his real job, he was a fucking some type of county judge down in Sumner County in Gallatin, Tennessee. And Gallatin, Tennessee is right up just a bit northeast of Hendersonville, where all the wrestlers and Jerry Jarrett and all the country music stars back then lived, right? Gallatin's a little bit nicer suburb of Hendersonville. So anyway, since Thomas Marlin was a county judge up there, he would sometimes go into goddamn work with gig marks on his head and or a black eye or whatever. And he was on TV, and his cohorts up there would ask him about his wrestling matches and about his wrestling career or whatever. So anyway, the bottom line is, one night they decide, or one day, it was a Sunday afternoon, they booked a spot show in Gallatin, Tennessee. And again, this is only 30 miles, maybe 35, whatever, from downtown Nashville. So it was a Sunday afternoon spot show at the Vol State Gym, the school gym there. And you know, that was a way for the guys to be on a Sunday afternoon, go pick up a payoff and only be 30 minutes from home. But at this time, this was July 13th, 1979. It was right after, Brian, that Robert Fuller had taken all the guys to territory and gone to goddamn back to Knoxville after the split over there. And Jarrett was left with the Lawler, Dundee, the Blonde Bombers, Danny Davis, and, you know, others on the card, right?
The Gilberts versus the Waynes.
Exactly. And the father and son tag team of Buddy and Ken Wayne were doing a program with the father and son tag team of Tommy and Eddie Gilbert. And also there was some of the guys that had trained at Buddy Fuller's farm, Dallas Montgomery, those guys on the card. But on this particular day, Buddy and Ken Wayne were not going to wrestle a father and son team, but a brother team. They decided to book Eddie and Thomas Marlin against Buddy and Ken Wayne on this show in Gallatin, which is right down the road from where everybody knows who the fuck the Marlin brothers are, right? So when Thomas Marlin's co-workers heard that they were going to get to see him wrestle just right here in town, right down the road, they wanted to get involved. So what they did was they built a wrestling spectacular around this match. And they had the other guys in the territory on the card too. I don't know if Lawler was there. The rest of the card is not listed. But Dundee was there. He lived in Hendersonville, and they had a regular card. But all the advertising featured this match because all of the friends of Thomas Marlin got involved. So they had a tag team match with Tommy and Eddie Marlin against Buddy and Ken Wayne. But the special referee of the match was another county judge named Richard Sutton. And the timekeeper of the match was another judge named Bethel Brown. And the ring announcer was a state senator named Tommy Cutrer. And the ring maintenance supervisor was the superintendent of roads. The Marlin brothers' bodyguard was the sheriff of Sumner County. The Marlon Brothers valet was the registrar of deeds, J.B. Rippey. Their manager was the county court clerk, Jimmy England, and the ring physician was another judge named Shelton Hatcher. So the entire administration of this fucking county was involved in this wrestling match at the Vol State Gym on a Sunday afternoon, and you could get in for $4 and see it. And they did like about fucking 800 or 1,000 people for what she was saying, because that's the spot shows at that point in time would do 500 people anyway, most of the time, unless it was Madisonville, Kentucky or something. But they had every fucking celebrity in this goddamn county at the wrestling matches because one of the judges was wrestling. That may be a unique. I know there's been politicians involved at various points, but not the whole goddamn roster, right?
So I know what would happen nowadays. Did it happen then? Did Ken Wayne take a bump for every single judge at one point?
I think he did, yes. Because he had just started then, and he was feeling real froggy. He took when I got into business, my first year in the business, the most terrifying, we didn't know the word botch back then, but the most terrifying fucked up bump that I ever saw to that point that I thought, my God, we're going to have to call an ambulance. He's dead. He took, when I was managing him and Danny Davis, Danny's back, he hurt his back and he was out, and Ken was filling in some of the matches as a single. And we were in Nashville at the fairgrounds one night, and he wanted to take the Harley race bump. He'd been working on it because Ken was only like 5'6", 5'7", right? And he was like his dad. He had long legs, but short upper body. And he was going to take, where you shoot the guy corner to corner that Triple H is stolen and everybody's stolen from Harley, where you shoot the guy corner to corner and he would go up and over the top rope backwards, feet in the air, and then land on the floor, right?
Yeah.
Well, Ken had been practicing and did that bump perfectly. It was amazing. Holy shit. I was like, wow, that's cool. That's just swell. But the problem was he forgot where he was, because in Nashville, the ring that they used at the fairgrounds back in those days, they kept it at the fairgrounds. They didn't have to haul one in and set it up and take it down, haul it away every night. It just brought it in from the back room. The top rope was the shortest top rope on any ring I've ever been in. It was waist high to me. And I literally, my first year in the business, every time I was booked in Nashville, I jumped into the ring over the top rope as a manager because I was so thrilled that I could do it on no other ring, right? But this fucking low top rope. Well, Ken, as I mentioned, was short, and he had perfected this bump to where when they shot him off, as soon as he turned and was going into the turnbuckle, he would push off and jump, because then his ass would hit the top turnbuckle and it would start turning him, and he could hook his right arm over the top rope and go the rest of the way, right? Or around the top rope, I should say. He jumped on this ring and his ass cleared the top turnbuckle. He never turned. He jumped and went backwards over the top rope and hurtled through space and landed in a fucking flat-backed heap out on the goddamn concrete floor. And I said, oh my God, the people went, oh. And I ran over there to him and I fucking looked down. I said, are you all right? Are you all right? He's, oh, goddamn. He said, oh, goddamn. He said, just stall for time. And I start yelling at the referee so he won't count. And I can't even remember who we were working with. The opponents trying to come and break the count, and Ken's getting up and he's pushing himself. The cops had chairs sitting in the corners of the ring, folding chairs that they would sit in, Well, the cop has stood up because Ken's crawled over to him and pushed himself up on that guy's chair because he don't want to go to people in the front row. They'll kick him while he's down, right? And he pushed himself back up to his feet, and he was shook the fuck up and didn't break anything and didn't miss any matches, but he got back in. They didn't go too much longer after that. Anyway, that was a story about the old days in Tennessee.